Continuing forward with our discussion of plant biodiversity, we will see another great innovation. The next great evolutionary leap forward, seeds. Here are our learning objectives, which are perhaps deceptively short. We will cover another 4 phyla here and encounter an increase in complexity of the life cycle. What are seeds? Well, seeds are not spores, first of all. Both spores and seeds are ways for plants, which don't move, to disperse and expand their sphere of influence. But let's examine the differences for a moment. Spores are usually single cells and totipotent, meaning they can develop into every type of haploid cell that the Gnetophyte may require. Being small, they don't require a large investment of energy or material to make, but that means they go out into the world with very limited resources. By contrast, seeds are multicellular, with cells differentiated into organs and tissue systems at the time of dispersal. Seeds are sometimes described as having a telescoping of generations, because the seed coat is derived from the mother sporophyte, the endosperm is derived from the haploid gametophyte, and the embryonic plant inside is a new sporophyte. The endosperm I just mentioned is actually a food source for the embryo, which is useful for the new plant before it is able to photosynthesize efficiently on its own. And lastly, while we saw elaters as an accessory component in some spores, seeds frequently have some type of accessory tissue that helps disperse the seed away from the parent plant. Seeds come in a great array of shapes, sizes, colors, textures, etc. They've been very successful. But what do they have in common? In other words, what are their synapomorphies? For years, it has been the Auburn way to describe a seed as a baby in a lunchbox. This was the idea of Dr. George Folkerts, who first taught this course. While this is a horrific image in some ways, it will help us to remember. The baby is the embryonic sporophyte, which is protected and nourished within the other layers of the seed. The embryo has baby versions of the organs we find in mature sporophytes. Cotyledons are embryonic leaves. The epicotyl, which is upon or above the cotyledons, is the embryonic shoot. The hypocotyl is the embryonic stem of the plant, and the radicle is the embryonic root. Surrounding the embryo is the endosperm, which means inside the seed, but functionally the endosperm is meant to serve as a food source for the embryonic plant as it begins its development. The endosperm is the lunch. Which leaves us with the box. The seed coat is derived from the mother sporophyte, and it protects the baby and the lunch until a new and potentially suitable habitat is reached. The seed coat can prevent damage and also aid in dispersal. Which brings us to our next 4 phyla of plants, the gymnosperms. Gymno is a Greek word root we've seen before, as in gymnodinium. That was a dinoflagellate with no thecal plates. It was naked. And that same word root applies here. Gymnosperms are also known as the naked seed plants. The seeds are uncovered by sporophyte tissue when they are released, in contrast with our next phylum, the angiosperms. All seed plants have vascular tissue and are therefore sporophyte dominant. In fact, the largest plants on the planet are gymnosperm sporophytes. The gametophytes, already rather secretive in the seedless vascular plants, are even more reduced in the gymnosperms. If you blink, you might miss them, but they are still there. There is always a gametophyte, even if it's very small. And one more feature of the gymnosperms and angiosperms is having large and small, mega and microspores. Heterospore, which we saw in the selaginales of Lycophyta. Heterospore is considered a prerequisite for producing seeds. Let's look again at this phylogram. Based on the information presented here, are gymnosperms monophyletic, polyphyletic, or paraphyletic? How many times do we need to cut the tree to remove all gymnosperms and only gymnosperms? Just once will do it. Therefore, the gymnosperms are considered to be a monophyletic plant group, as are the gymnosperms. 4 extant phyla of gymnosperms, and while their monophyly is generally accepted, the phylogeny of them is still contested. There is a soft polytomy in the tree for now. 3 of these phyla have few representatives left today, but the 4th one is both diverse and widespread. To begin, the phylum Gnetophyta with a silent G. There are 3 genera left in this phylum, and they are all rather odd in their own way. They are almost all dioecious, meaning they produce the mega and microspores on 2 different plants. Other than that, there isn't very much to unite them morphologically. Gnetum is a genus found throughout the tropics in South America, Africa, and Asia, including the Indonesian archipelago. I took these photos at the Field Museum in Chicago. In the upper right is a branch of the microsporophyte. On the lower left is the megasporophyte. These red and yellowish things are the seeds with fleshy seed coats. Something very important to know is that these are seeds and not fruit. Fruit is a very specific term that applies to the structures in the angiosperms. Fruit is the covering of the seeds, and these seeds are naked. They are not covered. So don't make this mistake, please. In the lower right corner here is a photo of a human use for Gnetum from Papua New Guinea. The roots are pounded to release the fibers that are twisted into rope. Another gnetophyte is Welwitschia mirabilis. While Gnetum is found in wet tropical forests, Welwitschia is found in the dry deserts of Namibia in southern Africa, as you can see on the range map. The stem of this plant looks rather like a burned-out stump. Surrounding the edge of the stem are 2 leaves that continue growing from meristems at their base. It looks like there are several in this image on the left, but they are just tattered by life in a flippin' desert. The upward angling of the leaves out of the stem is very important. Because of the dryness of the desert air, day and night temperatures fluctuate greatly. At sunrise, the cold nighttime air warms and dew forms in shadowy places, like under these leaves. The dew condenses and precious drops of water roll downward toward the stem. In the upper right photo, we can see some of the megasporangiate or female cones of Welwitschia. And down here, the official seal of the nation of Namibia, featuring 3 prominent vertebrates as well as a certain unique gnetophyte. The 3rd extant genus of Gnetophyta is Ephedra. This genus is found in temperate regions and is the only gnetophyte found growing naturally in the U.S., in the southwestern region. We have 12 species of Ephedra in the United States. Ephedra has common names joint fir or Mormon tea. The plants have very small leaves and resemble naked stems. Again, we see bright red seeds that are not fruit, but seeds. One species found in Texas and Oklahoma is Ephedra antisyphilitica, which has the common name clapweed. While there is no evidence that it has the properties the specific epithet suggests, the genus Ephedra does produce a very important medication known for its stimulant and antihistamine qualities. The plant produces a chemical called ephedrine, but because the plant is relatively uncommon and the molecule is fairly easy to synthesize, the medication widely marketed is pseudoephedrine, marketed under the abbreviated name Sudafed. While only 3 genera of Gnetophyta remain today, they are not the poorest phylum in terms of diversity. That honor would go to the Ginkgophyta. This phylum is monotypic, meaning there is only one extant species in the entire phylum. As with other plant phyla we've seen, there are a great number of extinct fossilized members, though. The only remaining species is Ginkgo biloba, also known as the maidenhair tree, or just ginkgo. Ginkgos are brought to you by the letter D. They are deciduous, meaning they lose their leaves every year. You can see in this photograph that the yellow leaves are still present on the tree, as well as many leaves that have already abscised and fallen on the ground. The leaves also present with dichotomous venation, or division into two equal-sized lobes. Stems also have short, stubby, dwarf branches that extend from the primary branches, which makes the trees identifiable even in winter when the leaves are gone. And for the last D, ginkgo trees are dioecious, meaning the megaspores and microspores are produced on separate trees. Commonly, these trees are referred to as male and female trees, though male and female refer to the gametophytes that develop within these sporophytes. The leaves of ginkgos are unmistakable also. They resemble paper fans or whale tails. And lastly, many know ginkgos by their seeds, which produce a smell likened to dog feces due to the presence of short-chain fatty acids. In this slide, we see a detail of the dwarf branches, leaves, and seeds of ginkgo trees. There is no plant that has a leaf quite like this. The shape is very distinctive, and it is one of the civic symbols of the city of Tokyo, Japan. Ginkgo trees have been commonly cultivated in Southeast Asia for millennia, and in Europe and the Americas for perhaps 200 years. They are very hardy and resistant to pollution. In fact, there are 6 ginkgo trees still growing in Hiroshima, less than 2 kilometers away from the atomic blast that leveled the city at the end of World War II, where no other plant or animal life survived. Once again, this fleshy thing here is not a fruit. It is a seed. Phylum 3 of Gymnosperms is Cycadophyta. The cycads resemble short versions of palm trees superficially, or sometimes they look like giant ferns, but palm trees are flowering plants, which are still in our future, and ferns are in our immediate past as seedless vascular plants. Cycads can be found growing naturally in Florida and Georgia, though the majority of their distribution is in the tropics and into the temperate zone of Africa. Like ginkgos and gnetophytes, cycads are dioecious, producing megaspores and microspores on separate plants. These separate spores are produced within different clusters of sporophylls, or strobili, similar to what we saw in Lycophyta and Equisitophyta. A major difference, though, is that heterospore means different size spores, and thus different shapes of strobili. Megasporangiate strobili produce the megaspores, and microsporangiate strobili produce the microspores. For pollination to happen, the pollen needs to get from the microsporangiate strobilus to the megasporangiate strobilus. The wind was an original dispersal agent for spores. For plants of this size, and retaining the gametophytes within the sporophytes, water just isn't effective. In cycads, there is a relationship a lot more direct than reliance on the wind. Insects, being animals, exhibit behavior. And behavior means patterned action. And those patterns of action are more reliable than the wind. Herbivory, or the eating of plants by animals, has been a thing for as long as there have been plants. Animals are much older than plants, living in the oceans while the forebears of plants were still green algae-like. But it took a while for plants to be able to turn this bug into a feature. Pollen, which is the male gametophyte, is relatively cheap to make in terms of energy and resources involved, compared to the female gametophytes. So, if beetles, for example, gorge themselves on pollen and then move on to another plant in search of more pollen, and there is so much pollen that some arrives at another plant intact and not as beetle poo, then there is a net energy savings compared to reliance on the very inefficient wind. And because mega and microsporangiate sporophytes look similar to a beetle, the beetles will inadvertently carry pollen to a megasporangiate plant, pollinating it rather than to the next meal of pollen. This is a strategy seen with alarming frequency in the flowering plants, though we are seeing the genesis of that process in the cycads. Pollination by animals is called zoophily, and we will see many different versions of this in the flowering plants. I took this photo at the Kirstenbosch Botanical Garden near Cape Town, South Africa. South Africa is home to a great diversity of cycads. In this picture, there are several species of cycads, which are the low-growing plants that look like green fountains Here, 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 and here. This photo shows a detail of a cycad with a pair of megasporangiate strobili. Maybe add pineapple to the list of possible lookalikes. This brings us to the fourth and final phylum of Gymnosperms, Coniferophyta, also known as Pinophyta. Commonly called conifers, meaning cone-bearing, this phylum is the most widespread and diverse of the Gymnosperms, as this long list of familiar trees will attest. Among the plants, conifers are the champions in several impressive categories. The oldest trees known are found in the White Mountains of eastern California and into Nevada. Bristlecone pines have been dated to over 5,000 years old. The biggest trees in the world are also conifers. Giant sequoias are found in the central part of the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. These trees are not the tallest, but they are close to it, approaching heights of over 80 meters or 275 feet. Combine that with a diameter of over 11 meters or 35 feet, and that makes these trees the most massive plants on the planet. While giant sequoia trees aren't the tallest trees, their closest living relatives, coast redwoods, are. These trees are also found in California, only along a thin margin near the coast. There are many trees that extend over 100 meters in height, with the tallest of the tall reaching 115 meters. That's longer than a football field, including the end zones. As the most diverse and familiar of the Gymnosperms, we will draw the life cycle of a pine tree, a member of the Coniferophyta, as a representative of the Gymnosperms. With the advent of seeds, things get a bit more complicated, as you can see. But some elements we've seen all along. For example, an alternation between sporophyte and gametophyte. But there are a couple of important new twists. A reduction in the gametophyte size, heterospore producing two different sized spores, and seeds, for example. This slide shows us a long list of terms we need to know, but we're about to draw them, so hopefully that will demystify the way these components interact. So, as promised, these few learning objectives, which actually encompass a lot of learning. This leaves us with one last phylum. This last phylum, though, is the most successful, widespread, and diverse plant phylum. It is a phylum that introduces a feature not yet seen. The final leap forward in terms of plant evolution, flowers, and fruits.